recovered.
God saved my life.
The 2 Americans stricken with Ebola go home from the hospital. Failed rescue. The military tried to rescue journalist Jim Foley, now slain by Islamic State terrorists. Sticky situation. California's drought means fewer wildflowers and lower honey production. And stepping up. Rick Perry sounding very much like a presidential candidate in spite of a criminal indictment. Those stories and more on EWTN News Nightly for Thursday, August 21st, 2014. Good evening from Washington. Thanks for joining us. I'm Brian Patrick with your news now. He's not formally a 2016 presidential candidate, but today Texas Governor Rick Perry certainly sounded like one. He spoke here in Washington on everything from the border crisis to Christian persecution in Iraq. Our Wyatt Goolsbee was there today and is here now with that story. Wyatt?
Yes, Brian, Governor Perry was scheduled to talk about the border crisis and immigration reform, and he did, but a pair of recent indictments and questions about how he would handle the ongoing terrorist attacks in Iraq changed that tone, one to much more political.
And with my fellow citizens, both Republicans and Democrats, I aim to defend our Constitution and stand up for the rule of law in the state of Texas.
Governor Perry today arrived at Washington's Heritage Foundation defending himself after a pair of indictments back home. This week, Perry's mugshot made the rounds in online social media, but instead of focusing on his picture, Perry spoke about more gruesome images on the web, the beheading of journalist James Foley and the ongoing persecution of religious minorities by the terror group ISIS.
The poor souls who didn't get away have met the worst of fates: beheadings, rape, enslavement, crucifixions. That's the character of this enemy. They actually take pictures of their atrocities and post them online, calling it a preview of what we can expect in America.
Perry criticized President Obama, saying that he hasn't done enough to stop the terrorists and that more airstrikes are needed, along with more support for the Kurdish forces fighting ISIS in the northern part of the country. He came just short of saying he would support sending combat forces back into Iraq, but said he would be open to the idea. Perry also said the president has not done enough to support law enforcement on the border.
Over the years, many thousands of violent crimes in the United States trace directly back to our porous border.
The potential presidential candidate also said he's worried terrorists unchecked in Iraq will make their way here, either with Western passports or crossing the southern border. From here, Governor Perry is scheduled to meet with Republican activists in both New Hampshire this week and South Carolina next week. Meanwhile, Democrats in both Texas and across the country have criticized Perry, saying he will need to properly defend himself, saying the accusations of abuse of power cannot simply be dismissed. Brian?
Thank you, Wyatt. We're glad to welcome back Alexandra Jaffe, a campaign reporter at The Hill. Rick Perry speaking on immigration just a couple of days after being indicted on a criminal charge. Does he seem concerned to you about that?
Not at all. It's the same Rick Perry we've seen for months now, and some might even call him buoyant. He actually turned himself in to be booked on Tuesday and minutes later went to get an ice cream cone with supporters. So he's actually probably had a pretty good week despite being indicted on 2 counts last Friday.
He's getting a lot of FaceTime on television, that's for sure. Will he run for president? Did it sound like that way to you today?
You know, he's making all the moves that a potential presidential contender will make. He's making multiple stops to those early primary states. He's been meeting with sort of party leaders, and he's been out front on issues like immigration reform. So it looks like he is moving towards that, but the question is, will Americans give him another chance? And polling has shown they're not yet ready to sort of move past 2012.
So this indictment, would it really hurt him politically, or could it actually help him, depending, of course, on the outcome?
Right. At this point, it actually looks to have helped him, particularly with Republicans. It's given a lot of Republicans sort of a reason to take a second look at him. He's seen as a bit of a joke because of how he handled the 2012 elections, and he enters, he's going to New Hampshire this weekend, where he's not sort of the front runner. They're known for their libertarian views. But a lot of conservatives there have now said, you know, there's politically motivated attack on him from Democrats, means that maybe we should line up behind him, give him another shot, support him.
Interesting how that works. So how do you see this case against him?
It's hard to say. Of course, you know, Democrats and Republicans have criticized it, and it does seem like the proof is thin, but we haven't heard, you know, the prosecution's case, we haven't heard the defense's case, and it's worth noting that the prosecutor in the case is known back in Texas for being very sort of middle of the road, not politically motivated, and well respected. So it's hard to see where this political motivation would come from.
So do you think this whole thing can be resolved before the presidential primary campaign really kicks into high gear?
They are trying to expedite it and kind of get it out of the way right now, but you can bet you'll continue to hear about it from Democrats for months. And it's given them more fodder for attacks because this is sort of the latest potential presidential contender that we see under investigation, Governor Christie, Governor Walker. So we definitely will continue to hear about it long after it's decided.
Yeah, the Bridgegate thing with Christie, you mentioned Walker, Wisconsin. Now this with Perry. Who can the GOP turn to at this point? As who's going to rise to the top of all this, do you think?
Right, that's exactly the question. And what's interesting about this situation is nearly every single one of Rick Perry's potential 2016 opponents have come out in support of him. This could have been an opportunity for them to sort of point to Rick Perry's mismanagement or, you know, target him as scandal-plagued, but not at all. They've all defended him. So it's hard to see who wins from this, aside from Perry himself, surprisingly enough.
We'll see. Alexandra Jaffe, thanks for joining us tonight.
Thanks for having me.
Some of the other stories our EWTN News Nightly team has been covering in today's world. A lawsuit charging the organizers of a black mass in Oklahoma City with possessing a stolen consecrated Eucharist is now before a district court. Archbishop Paul Coakley asked the court to order the host to be returned to him immediately, and late word today, that has now happened. The host is back in the church. The suit contends a consecrated host that has not been consumed actually belongs to the Catholic Church. It's the property of the church. That satanic group planned to desecrate the Eucharist, which the church says is stolen property. And before that host was returned this afternoon, we talked earlier today with the head attorney for the Archdiocese. Attorney Michael Caspino joining us from Minneapolis by satellite. His law firm represents Archbishop Coakley and the Archdiocese of Oklahoma City in this suit. Mike, what's your personal motivation for taking on this case? It was really your idea, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. The reason why we took on this case is we couldn't just, my partner Tim Bush and I just couldn't sit back and do nothing and watch people go ahead and desecrate the Blessed Sacrament. That was the entire reason why we contacted Archbishop Coakley and offered our services to assist. And this is a very important thing to us. This is the Blessed Eucharist is the greatest thing in the world to us.
So let's be clear, a satanic black mass ritual requires a consecrated Eucharist, right?
It does. It requires a consecrated Eucharist, and the Satanists will then defile the consecrated Eucharist.
So your suit is based on the simple argument that a consecrated Eucharist belongs to the Catholic Church. So if they have it, it had to be stolen. So legally, they're in possession of stolen property, right?
That's it exactly. We have a very, very simple legal argument. This is not about religious liberty. It's not about First Amendment rights. It's simply about property law. A consecrated host is the property of the Roman Catholic Church. They have it. They have no permission to have it, and they need to give it back. Yesterday, we filed our paperwork with the court, and the court has already granted a temporary order that they not desecrate any Eucharistic hosts in their possession. Next week, at some point, we'll have a hearing on this, whether or not the judge compels them to turn over the Eucharistic host back to us. But our argument, again, is just very simple. It's stolen property, and we want it back.
Is this the first time this approach has been taken to try to stop a satanic black mass?
To our knowledge, it is. To our knowledge, it is. It's a novel legal argument, and I think the beauty of the legal argument is its simplicity. It is our property, and we want it back. And in any society, we respect property rights, and the Eucharist is the property of the Roman Catholic Church.
When do you expect a ruling in this case?
Probably late next week. Under the Oklahoma statutes, he has 5 days, the Satanists have 5 days to turn the consecrated host back over. If they don't, the court will then set a hearing. And we fully expect that to happen. The leader of that satanic group has already said he's not going to turn the host back over So we expect a court battle and we expect to win. You can't just go into churches and steal sacred pieces of sacred items and not expect to be held legally accountable.
Well, we'll continue to follow this and count on you for updates. Mike Hespino joining us by satellite from Minneapolis. Thanks for being with us tonight. Of course, that was a little earlier.
Thank you for having me.
Mike did update us, and the host has been returned. We'll see if that suit is dropped or if it continues on. Very interesting case. Meanwhile, the Archdiocese of Cincinnati is discouraging its 113 schools from participating in that Ice Bucket Challenge to benefit the ALS Association. The reason? The group's funding of embryonic stem cell research is, quote, in direct conflict with Catholic teaching, end quote. The use of adult stem cells in research is morally acceptable and actually encouraged by the church. The Archdiocese says if schools participate in the Ice Bucket Challenge, the money that's raised should go to groups conducting pro-life-driven research. The USCCB hasn't taken a stand on the Ice Bucket Challenge. A spokesman there said this is a directive, a local matter, that is. The ALS Association issued a statement in response. It says, in part, the ALS Association primarily funds adult stem cell research using stem cells derived from the skin cells of people with ALS. Currently, the association is funding one study using embryonic stem cells. This research is funded by one specific donor. If a donor is not comfortable with the type of research, he or she can stipulate that their dollars not be invested in that particular area. A federal judge rules Florida's gay marriage ban is unconstitutional. Voters approved the measure in 2008. The judge is ruling this violated 14th Amendment guarantees of equal protection and due process. Now, there is a delay of today's order, meaning marriage licenses will not immediately be issued to same-sex couples. The U.S. government says it made an unsuccessful rescue attempt to free American journalist James Foley, and that ISIS also demanded a huge ransom to free the slain journalist. A graphic video of Foley's beheading was released Tuesday. He was working as a freelance reporter in Syria when he was captured in 2012. The Islamic group that took Foley wanted more than $130 million in ransom, but the State Department says meeting that demand would harm other U.S. citizens.
We believe that paying ransoms or making concessions would both put all Americans overseas at greater risk for kidnapping and in harm's way, but that ransoms would also fund and finance exactly the groups we are trying to degrade their capabilities.
U.S. law bars negotiating with or paying any ransom to terrorists. The Pentagon says last month's mission to rescue hostages, including Foley, from a site in Syria failed because the hostages weren't there. And late today, reports that Pope Francis personally called the family of James Foley. According to one report, a Vatican spokesman says Foley's family was, quote, deeply moved and grateful for the Pope's gesture. Israel may call up more reservists after carrying out an overnight airstrike, killing 3 senior Hamas leaders in Gaza. This is aerial video from that attack. Israel claims the 3 leaders played key roles in building tunnels for smuggling weapons and moving soldiers. Palestinians in Gaza came out by the thousands after the attack. They formed a giant funeral procession for the Hamas leaders. An Israeli official says tens of thousands of reservists are likely to be called up to counter ongoing rocket attacks and violence. More than 2,000 Palestinians and 67 Israelis have died in the past 6 weeks of violence. An American doctor who contracted Ebola while treating patients in West Africa expresses his gratitude while leaving an Atlanta hospital today. Dr. Kent Brantley and fellow American missionary Nancy Wright-Bull both tested clear of the virus, and they've been discharged from the hospital. Our Susie Pinto reports.
Almost 3 weeks ago, Dr. Kent Brantley arrived at Emory University Hospital as the first known Ebola patient to be treated on U.S. soil. On Thursday, he stood and thanked the doctors who declared him clear of the virus.
Today is a miraculous day. I'm thrilled to be alive, to be well, and to be reunited with my family.
Brantley became ill while working with the missionary group Samaritan's Purse in Liberia. Missionary Nancy Wright-Bull, brought to Emory with the virus days after Brantley, has also been released, but asked for privacy. The decision to bring the 2 Americans home for treatment had met questions, controversy, and concern about a potential spread of the disease into the U.S.
It was the right decision to bring these patients back to Emory for treatment. What we learned in caring for them will help advance the world's understanding of how to treat Ebola virus infections.
Despite this promising news, the outbreak continues to spread in West Africa. The World Health Organization said Wednesday that the death toll tops 1,350.
Please do not stop praying for the people of Liberia and West Africa.
Doctors at Emory now hope to share their knowledge. Brantley and Wright Bowl were both treated with an experimental drug.
We are hopeful that what we've learned here will assist our colleagues in Africa in caring for these critically ill patients.
When untreated, Ebola is deadly in up to 90% of cases. Susie Pinto, EWTN News Nightly.
Coming up, we visit a parish where a farmer's market may help fill the pews. And the Pope's personal envoy returns from Iraq, making a case for aid to refugees. Thanks for joining us on this Thursday evening. This is EWTN News Nightly. I'm Brian Patrick, and Governor Jay Nixon is ordering the Missouri National Guard to start withdrawing from Ferguson, Missouri. There's been almost nightly scenes of unrest since a white police officer fatally shot an unarmed black teenager there over a week ago. We're hearing from Attorney General Eric Holder, who visited the city yesterday.
In my conversations with dozens of people in Ferguson yesterday, it was clear that this shooting incident has brought to the surface underlying tensions that have existed for many years. There is a history to these tensions, and that history simmers in more communities than just Ferguson.
Holder says he sees a real desire from the people of Ferguson to have good relations with law enforcement. 163 people have been arrested in connection with protests. Police reports show only a handful of them actually live in Ferguson. It's good to have Reverend Dean Nelson with the Frederick Douglass Foundation with us tonight. So in light of what's going on in Ferguson, let's talk about mentoring. In your experience, does investing in mentoring programs for communities like this really make a difference?
Well, thanks, Brian. And without a doubt, it makes a huge difference. A study that was done by a group in Wisconsin demonstrated that as long as mentoring is done in an effective way over a long period of time with individuals who are going to be consistent in the lives of those whom they mentor, that it shows that it actually makes a whole world of difference.
What does this mentoring look like? Is it a one-on-one?
Yeah, you know, for me in my life over the last 20 years, my wife and I have been blessed to be involved in the lives of many young men, some of them who have lived with us for a couple of years. Really what they need first and foremost is somebody who is available and somebody who's willing to give. And some of the greatest rewards that I've been able to experience is seeing those young men now actually grown up, married, educated, and are doing the same thing in the lives of other young men.
But you don't have to have someone to live with you if you want to mentor them. I'm sure that worked great for you, but there might be some people that want to mentor that maybe don't want to go quite that far.
Sure. Well, you know, there are a number of great mentoring programs around the country that have done good work, particularly if you think about the boys and girls, you know, big brothers, big sisters. In fact, they've shown that 46% of those who have been involved just in a simple program, meeting once or twice a month, that they actually are 46% less likely to be involved or engaged in illegal drugs, 27% less likely to be involved in alcohol before they're of age. So I think that people who, again, are willing to give of their time, particularly you know, one-on-one, that there is evidence to show that it makes a huge difference.
Consistency is important, though. Who would make a good mentor?
Wow. Well, let me say this. First of all, I think of Frederick Douglass, you know, who actually made the statement that it's easier to, you know, repair, or rather, it's easier to help young children than to repair broken men. And I think that what the people that we look for to do good mentoring are those, number one, who can make themselves available. We're not talking about people that have to have great education or supernatural speaking ability or great skills, but people who are simply willing to become involved in the lives of others. We think about coaches maybe in our life in the past, people who maybe are volunteers on sports teams. Those are the type of people, again, who are willing to give of themselves and not necessarily have a whole lot of education or other things.
I'm grateful for good mentors and try to be one myself. And thank you for the work that you do with the Frederick Douglass Foundation. Reverend Dean Nelson, thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Well, Pope Francis met today with the cardinal that he sent to Iraq for an eyewitness perspective on the plight of Christians and other religious minorities there. The papal envoy was in Iraq for the past couple of weeks, also voicing the Pope's concerns to leaders there. Our Rome correspondent Alan Holdren is covering that story. And Alan, what did the cardinal report to Pope Francis today?
Well, it's the Italian Cardinal Fernando Filoni, and he went there to Jordan first and then through Iraqi Kurdistan, all the way down through Iraq to Baghdad in the name of the Pope. He was going to bring the Pope's solidarity to especially the Iraqi Christian refugees there, and he did so there over the course of about 6 days. And when he came back, talked to the Pope today, he told the Pope about how impressed he was at the extraordinary faith of these Christians and other religious minorities in the face of humanitarian crisis. He said that there's one thing that they really need from outside of Iraq right now, and that's solidarity. It's not just words and moral support, but also economic solidarity, support. And he actually made a donation while he was there in the name of the Pope to bring that concrete aid from the Pope himself.
And Pope Francis has appealed often in recent days, Alan, for international governments and other organizations to help these Iraqis. What are you hearing in Rome about this?
Well, actually, while the Pope was in Korea over the past week, Cardinal Filoni was there in Iraq, and the Pope was tweeting his support for Cardinal Filoni and for Iraqi Christians while he was away, so he still had an eye on the situation there. He actually made an appeal for prayers and gave more support to Cardinal Filoni on Monday at Mass there in the Cathedral of Seoul. Then again yesterday at the general audience, he asked for support and prayers for Iraqis. I actually heard from an Iraqi priest who 2 days ago received a phone call at a field hospital, now where he's working there outside of Ankawa in Iraq, where he's working on behalf of the refugees, trying to support them, and he received support directly from the Pope over the phone. The Pope gave him his blessing, and he said he was speechless because of it. So the Pope is doing as much as he can, it seems like, to voice his support and call in international support, international aid for the refugees there in Iraq. And we'll see if anything concrete comes of it. It's still a very difficult situation for the Christians and for all religious minorities and ethnic minorities there in Iraq. Brian?
Our Alan Holdren in Rome, thank you. The former governor of Vatican City, a close friend of St. John Paul II, and one-time head of the Detroit Archdiocese has died. The Archdiocese says Cardinal Edmund Sciocca died of natural causes last night at a Michigan hospital. Pope John Paul II made him a cardinal in 1988, not long after he became the Vatican's point man for finance. In 98, he was running Vatican City, one of the smallest countries in the world. Cardinal Sciocca was a strong supporter of Mother Angelica as she developed EWTN. Since his retirement from active ministry in 2006, he'd been living in a Detroit suburb. Cardinal Sciocca was 86 and a priest for 60 years when he died. Up next, why California's drought means more money to buy your honey. It may be a bit of a stretch, but a Virginia parish is looking to connect people's love for fresh food with their need for a faith community. Jason Calvi reporting from Chantilly, Virginia tonight.
A rainbow of colors and a harvest full of flavor to grab.
Sizes of lobsters we bring to the markets. This is a 1.5 pounder. This was swimming in the Atlantic yesterday.
This may look like a normal farmer's market, but also on the menu here, a banquet of heavenly food. Welcome to St. Veronica Parish in Chantilly, Virginia. The pastor here has a goal.
Bring people onto the church property who would normally come to a church, or maybe a fallen away Catholic, or someone who's curious about the church.
They also give church tours to the interested shoppers.
So kind of a baby step back into the church. It's our way of trying to go out into the community.
Farmers markets are booming.
Over about the last 6 years, they've like quadrupled in numbers across the country.
And as more people go green, this is a small reminder of the creator of the harvest.
Jason Calvi reporting tonight. The nation's leading honey producer is hurting as a multi-year drought stings consumers with higher prices. More from Catherine Zeltner tonight.
California's record drought hasn't been sweet to honeybees. The state is one of the country's largest honey producers, but the 3-year drought has taken a toll on the crops and wildflowers that provide nectar that bees need to make honey.
So our honey crop is severely impacted by the drought. and it does severely impact our bottom line as a business.
This year, Brandy's bees have only produced about 10% of the honey they make in a good year. The Brandys are feeding their bees sugar syrup because there isn't enough nectar. Besides selling honey, beekeepers earn their living from pollinating crops such as almonds, cotton, and melons. But farmers are hiring fewer beekeepers because the drought has forced them to tear out orchards and plant fewer crops.
If this would persist, you'd see higher food costs, higher pollination fees, and unfortunately higher prices for the commodity of honey.
The drought is hurting businesses such as Marshall's Farm Honey, which supplies high-end restaurants and markets in Northern California. The Napa Valley Company is having trouble making and buying enough honey to meet the demands of its customers.
We service our accounts. They keep coming back wanting more, and it's very painful to have to say, we don't have it.
The drought is just the latest blow to honeybees that have been decimated by pesticides, parasites, and disease. Beekeepers are working harder than ever just to keep their bees alive.
If you're not making honey, you're not paying your bills. That's the bottom line. And they tend to kick you off your land if you're not paying your bills.
It's a problem that's bound to get stickier as the drought deepens. Catherine Zeltner, EWTN News Nightly.
Thanks, Catherine, and thank you for joining us. Until tomorrow, I'm Brian Patrick. Good night, and may God bless you.